Hi, Preston. Alaska and Delta flights run on a different system and are not impacted like much of the airport. SeaTac Airport is suggesting that passengers on international flights and some smaller carriers carry on their bags because of this system disruption. SeaTac Airport is holding more than just one type of baggage with a Samsonite-size cyber problem. Screens are dark, kiosks are down, and the lines for Spirit Air are enough to dampen any passenger's spirit. How long have you been waiting in line?
Approximately an hour from the time we got here.
Gabe and Karen Martinez are trying to get home to Virginia. Has anybody told you what's going on?
Something about the computers got hacked and they're doing everything manually.
The primitive plane travel complete with Xerox copies of signs and handwritten boarding passes, the result of what SeaTac is calling a cyber attack. What the heck happened here?
And that point that we're still looking into that.
SeaTac Airport spokesperson Perry Cooper suggests the biggest impact has been on airlines that share check-in and baggage areas or common use gates, and that the hack halted internal baggage processing for those airlines.
So what is occurring is that they can go to a certain point, but at that point they can't be separated to different parts of the airport where they would be loaded onto their specific aircraft.
Cooper is coy on the circumstances. Why would nefarious characters want to attack SeaTac Airport?
That's a great question.
It's making us not too easy about getting out of here. Are we going to get out of here? Is it going to take longer? Is the plane going to leave without us?
The Martinezes will continue to ponder those questions as long as this logistical nightmare does too. The TSA said today that it operates under a different computer system, is not impacted by the problems with SeaTac Airport, and they can still cross-reference the passenger manifest even with a handwritten boarding pass. That's the story for now. Live at SeaTac Airport, I'm Chris Daniels, KOMO News.
Well, this is a live look at SeaTac International Airport tonight. Not too bad. The traffic is pretty good, actually. Where disruptions, they are still happening following that cyber attack on the airport's computer system. We know the Port of Seattle was also impacted by the attack. I talked with Chris Daniels about the services being impacted.
Well, Chris, thanks for being with us here at ARC Seattle tonight. So what a mess this has been all weekend long for passengers. There are specific airlines I know are affected more than others, and depending on where people are going. But what's the latest right now, and what have you been able to learn from officials today?
Yeah, well, this is now day 3, and Preston, we are hearing from SeaTac Airport there's no end in sight, that they believe these outages, which are disrupting especially the check-in and baggage process, that is going to continue for a while, likely into tomorrow. And this is where it gets complicated because it really is dependent on which airline people are traveling on. Doesn't impact security, but really any of the signage inside SeaTac Airport, many of the check-in areas and kiosks at SeaTac Airport, and in particular the baggage process, all impacted by this hack. That there really is still very little information on exactly what happened here, whether this was a virus or whether somebody specifically fished for information. But the bottom line is there's a lot of disruptions inside SeaTac Airport, and a lot of long lines as well. The airport is suggesting, because of all of it, if you are flying, particularly on airlines that are not named Alaska or Delta, that you try and carry your bag online because it's that disruptive, and they've had so much trouble with the baggage process as a result of this system-wide issue for SeaTac.
So they're saying carry the bag on the plane instead of check it.
Correct. That there have been issues with directing the baggage. Now, I'll just name one airline in particular where we saw long lines today. Spirit Air. They're at the shared common spaces. You've seen this, Preston, when traveling. The airlines that may have only 1 or 2 flights a day or just a handful of flights, they share space in the concourse. When you check in, they share space at the gate. And that is where this hack is coming into play. That we saw today at Spirit Air, a long line because people were having baggage tags handwritten, boarding passes handwritten. In fact, the Spirit Air folks put up a Xerox copy of their logo on the screens just to direct people to get there. and those bags go through a system. The way it's explained to me by Perry Cooper with SeaTac Airport, they go through a system where Alaska and Delta have a complete set of different circumstances. Your bags know they're scanned. They go down a certain belt here, a certain belt there. But what is happening with these common airlines, so to speak, is that it gets to a point in that system of conveyor belts where the bags are backing up. And that's the issue that they're having, bags not getting on the planes. People are having to hand check bags. We're told by SeaTac Airport that some airlines are bringing in equipment from other parts of the world to try and expedite this, which leads you to believe this is not going to be a problem that's fixed anytime soon.
You know, with this whole thing taking place, is security jeopardized at all as people are walking through TSA and the checkpoints?
It is a great question, Preston, because you hear handwritten boarding passes
Right.
in TSA. It's a natural question to have. TSA was at this press conference today and said they still have a way. Their system is different. It's not connected to SeaTac Airports. It's the federal government's own independent system. All of that was operating as normal today. We saw it. People are still going through TSA like you've seen on most days, but that they have a way to still check passenger ID. Think about it. When you go up, you show your ID. They cross-reference that with the boarding pass. They can also cross-reference the manifest, the flight manifest, and know who's on a particular plane. So TSA is saying there's no security issue here, that they still have a way of checking people and making sure they're getting on the correct flight and they are who they say they are, and that it's a completely separate system from the one that SeaTac is operating.
You know, last night I was there to pick up my wife coming in from San Diego on Alaska Airlines. Took a lot longer to get the baggage than normal. Plus, you've got all the construction at the airport. Plus, you've got the internet problems, the cyber attack here. There were just so many people there, just running into each other. It was an absolute mess. And then the backup, even getting to the airport, was also a huge mess. What's it like right there now for those of us who can't be there and see it with our own eyes?
Well, on the departure deck where I'm at right now, people may recognize this chain link fence in the departure area. I'm seeing traffic, no problem, go up to the main concourse and check-in area. We did see some lines earlier today, and we have heard from SeaTac Airport that this system has also impacted the parking system. So they were not charging people for parking over the last couple of days on or off because they didn't want traffic backing up in the ramp area in the parking garage. So that has also been impacted by this hack. And again, we're hearing it from SeaTac. They don't have any estimate on when this will be fixed. They're at least not providing information on what exactly this hack was about, who was hacking the system. You start to go down a thought process of what would somebody be trying to stop here when it's not necessarily the same system as TSA. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions today after this briefing that we had from SeaTac Airport, but it sounds like this is going to last for quite some time.
And it sounds to me like the takeaway from this at this point, as they're still working through trying to figure the cyber attack out and get everything back online, if you're not flying Alaska or Delta, make sure you bring your baggage online if you can and don't check it.
Bring your baggage. Also check in on the airline's own website. So we did hear that today, that people should check in from home, not necessarily rely on the app on your phone. Make sure you can print out a boarding pass at home if possible. Also allow some extra time, particularly for those common use areas. Spirit Airlines doesn't have the same kind of staff in Seattle that Alaska Airlines has. So they're advising people to show up even earlier. And yes, the big takeaway was carry on your bags if you can, because there's a lot of concern that bags aren't going to be making it on your plane and onto your flight.
Okay, Chris Daniels tonight from SeaTac Airport, working on this cyber attack that they keep trying to figure out. Chris, thanks for the update. I know a lot of people will find this information helpful. And as always, thanks for being with us here on Arc Seattle tonight. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks, Preston.
So as you know, cyber attacks can cause major disruptions for companies and can leave people's sensitive information at risk. Tonight, I talked with cybersecurity expert Jack Donaghy about how cyber attacks happen and what companies can do to protect themselves and your personal information.
Well, Jack, thanks for being with us here on Arc Seattle tonight. So let's talk about SeaTac International Airport. Why do you think the airport, the airlines, in this situation that we've been dealing with over the last 3 days, why do you think they were hit?
Well, the attacking groups, they're really pretty smart, and they do a lot of research to try to figure out where the most benefit's going to come from. And SeaTac is a very, very important airport. If you stop and think about the people who travel through it, some of the brightest, some of the most important tech executives around are going to make their way through SeaTac through the course of it. So if information can be stolen associated with their travel, that might be valuable. Secondly, as an infrastructure, SeaTac's really important because lots of people come and go there. And so they're more likely to do things like pay a ransom. So they make them a very attractive target for folks who are looking to monetize the attacks that they actually take care of.
When we watched this cyber attack go down, and I was there actually last night picking up my wife from the airport, I mentioned it in my previous interview, it seemed like just pandemonium kind of. People couldn't get their luggage, couldn't find their bags. There were just so many people in addition to all the construction. It just seems to knock everything offline, and then no one knows what the heck to do.
Yeah, and it's really interesting in this case, Preston. You see that the attack actually went against those customer side systems, right? These are the systems that are related to people knowing when their flights are leaving. It's related to getting tickets printed out or where the baggage is going to go, how it gets handled. And because it tapped into those systems and knocked those out, and they were taken offline, both as a preventative measure by the IT teams and also by the attack itself, you find that there's a lot of those individuals who are going to be put in a situation where they really don't know where to go. The traditional systems aren't working, and airports are complex systems with lots and lots of people in them. So you can understand why there'd be this slightly chaotic event.
And this comes not that long after the whole CrowdStrike situation where it took airports offline across the world. And now, here we are again, kind of like, deja vu. When it comes to this kind of cyber attack, and we see, it seems like infrastructure is just so vulnerable these days, even though a lot of people are trying to do what they can to protect it. But is there any way to really prevent these cyber attacks from happening if you have all the right things in place?
Well, I think you can make it a lot harder for these attacks to succeed, right? That initial entry point, I think, is always going to be very, very hard to perfectly bulletproof against these attacks. So something may get in. I think we see a lot of people doing a lot of work is to reduce the rate at which they can spread. You saw that here at SeaTac, where they actually took the systems offline so they wouldn't simply spread out and get even further out of control in the systems. But that ability to watch, to see when something abnormal is happening and to react to it, I think is probably more realistic. And I think at this point in our evolution of technology, more important than is trying to block everything in the first place. That ability to see that something's going wrong and react quickly so that it doesn't get out of hand to create an even wider scale impact, I think is probably the most important and the best thing that folks can do.
To give people kind of a better understanding as to what's taking place right now, when SeaTac officials speak and talk about, well, we're still working on getting things up and running again, it's still a process, we're still not there yet. What are they dealing with? What are they going on behind the scenes that we're not seeing in order to get things back online again?
Well, I think, they're using an abundance of caution, right? They know that someone has gotten into the systems. It was one of the first reports that came out on Saturday morning, right? That they noticed that the things were happening that shouldn't be happening, so they immediately took things offline. Now what they're trying to do, I'm sure, is understand anything that might have been touched, any system that could be corrupted, any identity maybe that had been stolen continues to be used. Because the worst thing would happen for the residents of the Seattle area would be to think that this thing was cleaned up. And 15 minutes after the airport comes back online and everything's moving along, it gets taken down again. So I think that the officials and the researchers and the teams and the technical folks who are involved in understanding this are trying to make sure that, number one, they understand everything that got touched so they can clean it. Number two, they understand all the anomalies that we're seeing so they recognize where they come from so they won't happen again. And third, they want to make sure that the systems are protected so that the same attack won't be successful again. I think it's a very prudent approach to take because, as you mentioned, the recent event because of the CrowdStrike issue, and now this, we don't want to be taking the folks who rely on SeaTac up and down this roller coaster for another spin.
Jack, what is it going to take to keep these cyber attackers from doing something in similar to what we saw with CrowdStrike? I know it's different, but of that scale, what would it take for these cyber attackers to really hack into these planes or do something that could be, really catastrophic and potentially put people's lives in danger?
Well, I think one of the very positive outcomes from the analysis that's gone on so far at SeaTac is that none of those sort of life-involving systems were tapped. You don't see TSA. They've announced the fact that they weren't touched by it. You know that the Customs and Border Patrol folks have not been touched by it. They've done a nice job of segmenting these different kinds of networks, these different kinds of systems from one another, so that if there is a problem in one of them, particularly one that's more likely to be public-facing, more likely to have a lot more folks on it, operating inside of it, so you don't have that bleed of these attacks from one system into the next. And again, I think that as you look at the way these networks are put together and the way that the systems are architected and the way that network traffic moves around, they try to do a very solid job of making sure that traffic from one system doesn't get to another system unless it's really supposed to be there. And that is so critical. In an ideal world, if everything were simply flat and everybody could see everything else, you'd think that would be wonderful communication. But the hard work that goes on to create systems which are ensured to protect against traffic that shouldn't be there from arriving or users who shouldn't be there from doing things, I think that's one of the most critical things, most crucial things we see to avoid exactly what you just described.
And last thing here, with all the safety measures in place, all the software to keep hacking from happening and cyber attacks, are you surprised that we're seeing this level of cyber attack at an airport or anything else to where these guys are getting in and really infiltrating a critical system that really keeps people moving across the United States? Is it surprising to you this day and age that we can't stop these kind of things?
Unfortunately, it's really not a surprise because we see it happening in so many industries. We've seen it happen very, very publicly in healthcare, where it's people's lives literally on the line and these systems are being affected. What's happened is, as a population, we've been really benefiting from all this data sharing. If I'm a patient in Boston and I end up in a hospital in Spokane, I can actually have my records shared. All this information is available, and we benefit from all those things. But what ends up happening, and folks don't think necessarily about it all the time, is there's a real responsibility, right? There's a responsibility for the organizations who can take advantage of all that interconnectivity to improve the services that they offer. And as yet, we haven't figured out exactly the right mix. You'll hear terms like zero trust or partitioning or what have you. But I think all of this is kind of lost on the folks who are really making the hard decisions about how to provide services and how to take care of people. But I think that events like this, Preston, and events like the healthcare attacks we've talked about and recent attacks against things like water systems, it's bringing it home to so many more people in the country that people are beginning to ask the question that you just had the presence of mind to ask, which is, how do we figure out a way to make these things stop happening? And what is the right amount of protection? And how do we achieve that balance between the connectivity that lets us get what we want and the protection that allows us to protect what we need?
Cybersecurity expert Jack Donaghy, thanks so much for being with us here on ARC Seattle tonight. Very helpful information. I know our viewers will find that very helpful tonight watching this, and we hope this cyber attack gets all resolved and things get running smoothly again at SeaTac International Airport. I know a lot of people are counting on them tonight to get the system fixed again. Thanks so much, Jack.
Thanks to you, Preston.